for State House in 2022. But in the same week, he made the announcement. The Court of Appeal sounded a death knell to his and President Kenyatta's push of a referendum to change the constitution. So there are a couple of issues on his table. With the executive without additional posts, Mr. Odinga's plan to craft a winning coalition is complicated. The euphoria with the BBI failure, will it have the reverse effect of the 2005 constitutional push which led to the birth of ODM? And the third question they're seeking to answer, the political debt that we've had time and time again, the former NASA members demanding that Raila Odinga honor the deals they entered in 2013 and the 2017 polls. A lot of details on these stories and much more in the local dailies. So we'll definitely get to cover them extensively right here. But I'd like to begin with one particular story, perhaps this one touching on the push by Parliament to push for reforms through the Constitution, where the Council of Governors, is cheering on the Kenyan Parliament to pursue the parliamentary initiative route to amend the 2010 Constitution after the Court of Appeal stopped the BBI amendment bill on Friday. This comes as several Jubilee members of Parliament have reportedly selected some 52 clauses from the ill-fated Building Bridges Initiative amendment bill that was quashed by a 7-judge bench of the Court of Appeal. But will this new push bear any fruits, or is it an effort in futility? KTN's Emmanuel Tor reports.
Just a day after the Attorney General Paul Kihara Kariuki announced that he would be seeking redress from the Supreme Court following the nullification of the BBI process by the Court of Appeal, the Council of Governors is now throwing its weight behind the parliamentary initiative in order to effect several changes that are possible through Parliament.
As the Council will therefore explore alternative avenues to ensure that the revenues to the counties are increased to at least 35%.
The governors have, however, dismissed efforts to appeal the case at the Supreme Court, saying it was an act of futility.
We are focusing on amendments through Parliament, so we are not interested in further appeals and further legal processes.
This now adding impetus to a push by a section of MPs from the Jubilee Party who are now crafting a way to bring back the BBI reggae by selecting 52 out of the 74 amendments in the BBI amendment bill. The amendments are being floated by Ndaragwa MP Jeremiah Kioni. They include increasing constituencies from the current 290 to 360, protecting 26 constituencies that are at risk of being scrapped due to low population quota. Other recommendations include increasing the allocation to counties to at least 35%, among others. However, the push has already met resistance from some quarters in leadership.
For now, I would urge members to hold their horses until we get that clarity in terms of what is doable, what is not, because they might expend a lot of effort, a lot of resources, a lot of public participation, and then end up being told you cannot do it because it goes against the ruling.
Those who are pushing through Bunge, let them continue with the initiative through Bunge. We are not opposed to it, but we are just saying the priority is focused on the election. The issue of trying to bring the amendment of the Constitution through the parliamentary initiative is actually too late.
For the World Development Fund bill, we don't require a referendum. We can still ensure that we do adequate legislation.
The push comes 3 months after a similar quest failed.
There is the question about staggering the payment of university students after they have cleared with the help. They have 7 years. That is their job. Those are statutory provisions. Issues that deal with the basic structure that has now become part and parcel of the Kenyan law, they cannot do it.
Members of Parliament will now be seeking the votes and the support of their colleagues in order to pass and return the BBI reggae back on track after it was stopped by the Court of Appeal. Emmanuel Tor, KTN News, Nairobi.
So that story by Emmanuel Tor is covered extensively. Page 8 of the Standard, they highlight how the Council of Governors want members of Parliament to pass the BBI proposal on revenue. where they have picked at least 9 clauses that they want the National Assembly and the Senate as well to consider before the next general election, as they do not require a referendum. We'll begin on that particular note. Joining me in studio to help us deliberate on this matters and more, James Gakuya, Member of Parliament, Embakasi North. It's great to have you with us, as well as Professor David Kikaya, who's a governance and political analyst. Gentlemen, many thanks for your time. Later on, we'll be joined by Alex Manyasi, who's a governance expert from our City Centre studios. I'd like to begin on this note. Mahesh, you're the Member of Parliament right here. Do you believe it's an effort in futility, this close to the general election, to perhaps push for 9 clauses that they want the National Assembly and the Senate to consider in terms of implementation, since they don't require referendum? Which side of the fence do you sit on this?
Thank you, Roger. Allow me to salute the viewers, wherever they are watching us from. Coming to the matter on our daily papers, on matters to do with prosecuting these parts of the bills that could have lied together with the BBI, that had no window, as the BBI seems to have dashed. I would say it has been happening all through, and it's the duty of the Parliament to prosecute every other bill, whether it is a member's bill or whether it is a governmental bill. These are the duties assigned to the Parliament to undertake. And what I would say is that every other bill will be considered by the members of Parliament, and at the final whistle, there are those bills that require simple majority approval, and there are those bills that must require the 2/3 of the House. Then what matters is that any bill that may require simple majority may sail very easily, but any other bill that may require the 2/3 is a big mountain in this particular time. Don't forget that, in fact, most of the members this particular time is the most busy moment, because every other member now is trying to strategize and put mechanisms on how he will also be able to come back to the same house. And therefore, the time most of these end days or days nearing to the election are very tricky. But in case there is those bills that members will feel that they are purely for common monarchy and they are good for the nation, I'm sure they will get the nod. But don't expect every other bill that will be taken to the House to get a straight approval, because don't forget that, in fact, there are such bills that we must prosecute, and if there are bills that actually has no straight or direct touch to the common monarchy, consider them to be rendered not viable.
Okay, well noted. And Gakuya, just briefly, I know last time we talked, the BBI was not considered null and void. At least it was still in the Court of Appeal. This time round, we well know it has been halted by that ruling by the 7-judge bench. Perhaps your quick reaction, because I think you saw it coming.
Roger, what I can say is that we have matured a lot in terms of fighting for our constitutional order. And personally, I'm very happy by the verdict of both the High Court and the Appellate Court of Appeal, because that has totally shown Kenyans that actually they are defenders of the Constitution, and the judiciary is not out there to be taken for a ride just for few individuals that may wish to take their own way or to score their own goal. And in this particular ruling, I would say it has now confirmed that rule of law has been upheld, and we have no any other entity that is entrusted to safeguard the interpretation of the law, and also to give justice to the common monarchy and the entire nation as a whole. And this matter has been entrusted and anchored to the judiciary. And I'm sure that judiciary equally want to see their independence as well interpreted in the Constitution going forward, to be well secured. And I'm sure that Even the judiciary had some windows that are indicating that, in fact, they are just about to be invaded in one way or the other. But in fact, I am sure that they have used that particular window to lock that particular route.
Okay, well noted. Let's cross over to Prof. Kikaya. Welcome to the show. I think on this BBI issue, it would be what proposal should actually sail through? Because it wasn't all negative. Looking at the proposal of 15 to 35% to counties, the issue of what development fund, once it's installed in the Kenyan constitution, this would have good fruits for the common Mwananchi. What say you on the way forward? Should it be an appeal process, or perhaps we focus on the IPPG route, or simply put, as the politicians have said, the focus is now on the election? What say you on this matter?
First of all, good morning, viewers and your team. First and foremost, I think we ought to understand that the mixed bag that was presented in the BBI was one of the contentious issues that was contested because passing it in totality or dismissing it in totality would have had the effects that I think political analysts have already delved into. So perhaps sieving through and identifying, as the Council of Governors have said, those that can go through the parliamentary route was a necessity that should have been foreseen. Now, but having said that, at this particular point in our political dispensation, when you out there is going to ask, what is the urgency, even with the ones that they want to sieve out? If you say it is important for us to have a youth fund, we've heard that before. To what effect has it gone? Secondly, if you talk about the issue of increasing funding to the counties, we know that it's not really an urgent matter, because even the 15% that counties were guaranteed never got disbursed, not even perhaps a half of it. So Onyekode is going to be asking, is this the best use of time and resources for Parliament to go back and revisit elements in the BBI, or is it the BBI being sneaked in through the back door? Then we find that some phrases or clauses have been brought in that most people didn't approve. And coming specifically to the way forward, I think most people have pronounced themselves. To me, I subscribe to the view that let's shelve this matter of the BBI on two levels. One, it has been a very divisive document, a very divisive debate, which has really poisoned our psyche to the point where it has actually achieved, or had actually achieved, the opposite what the president intended in terms of uniting the country. Why don't we let Kenyans have a moment of healing as we work and consolidate our minds towards the forthcoming elections? So I for one, does not see merit in our going to the Supreme Court. And then finally, I want to concur with my colleague here that the judiciary has redeemed itself in more than one way. We acknowledge there was a bit of dissent, but that is allowed from a purely academic point of view. The issue of the introduction, for example, of the ombudsman, anyone should have known it was going to look as if it was a direct attack on the judiciary by taking an element from it and also superimposing another layer of supervisory and defined role. And obviously that was going not to get anywhere. And this is why you find people like Musalia Mudavadi saying that, you know, the issue like ombudsman should have been perhaps be thought through carefully rather than be part of the poisoning that might have seen the BBI to its deathbed. Okay, well noted. Let me bring in Alex Manyasi joining us from our City Center studios. I believe we have him on the line. So Manyasi, as we talk about BBI, it's been 3 years that the Kenyan Mwananchi has had this word over and over again in terms of the benefits it might have when it comes to inclusivity and ending divisive elections. And then this happens. What next? You know, for those who believed in this process
that it held good benefits for the Kenyans when it comes to division of revenue, in terms of the national and county allocation. What say you about them? Are they a confused lot right now?
Yes, Jesse, and good morning to all our viewers. Obviously, for the people that were the proponents of the BBI process, I want to imagine that they had many cards on the table. That's my imagination and hope. In that sense, then you will imagine that they have options, and one of the options will be using Parliament, and the parliamentary option may not offer the entire BBI proposals as they were. So that's one. But secondly, I'll imagine that then the options on the table will be, because the collapse of the BBI process, even though I hear there's an appeal to the Supreme Court, which I'm not sure how much it will yield in terms of the outcome, then you will imagine that they will change their strategy in terms of campaign, because this was directly attached to the 2022 campaign process, even though the proponents have always said that there's no connection between the two. But in terms of your question about then the people who are hoping to get something out of the process, there's always a tomorrow, that's for sure. But at the same time, some of those provisions could be resolved through the parliamentary process, in the sense that you could, for example, if you wanted to add more money to the counties, then you will directly do that through the budgeting process, through the process where the governors sit with the deputy president and make agreements on how then revenue is supposed to be shared. Through the, of course, also through the Revenue Authority and through the Senate. But in the entire process, the BBI process, in my view, if you asked me, it looks like it's getting more complicated over the day.
Let's see how it all proceeds, even as there are plans from the Attorney General's office to push this matter to the Apex Court to find some clarity with finality on some issues that stuck out during that 7-judge bench ruling. I'll ask to shift focus onto other matters, but which is still interlinked with that particular ruling that was handed over by the Court of Appeal, where the ICT Cabinet Secretary Joe Mucheru has termed Friday's Court of Appeal ruling that halted the BBI process as judicial activism. Mucheru accuses the court of usurping Wanjiku's role in halting the process and thus interfered with the government's plan to increase resource allocation to the grassroots. And in a thinly veiled attack on Deputy President William Ruto, the Cabinet Secretary rubbished the much-hyped economic models, terming them archaic. The Cabinet Secretary did not also spare the charge, accusing religious leaders of being used by politicians. Our reporter Alan Ochanda with more details.
Even though a section of political leaders were initially proponents of the BBI process, welcomed Friday Court of Appeal ruling halting the process, some state officials were rubbed the wrong way. ICTCS Joe Mucheru is the latest to register his disappointment with the ruling, terming it as judicial activism that has dented the government's blueprint to up its resource allocation to the grassroots through BBI.
We were planning to ameliorate some of these hardships by pledging to shift more resources mashinani through the BBI initiative. But it wasn't to be. Judicial activism took care of that.
Speaking at the National Youth Conference in Limuru, Mucheru said the ruling amounts to the courts usurping the powers of Wanjiku and settling political scores.
In dismissing the BBI is to usurp the role of Wanjiku in deciding her fate. They have opted to settle political scores at the expense of the common man. However, despite what happened, the government will not be deterred in doubling its efforts to spur development across the country, and in particular supporting the youth to become the core pillars of our development agenda.
The CS also took Deputy President William Ruto head-on, rubbishing his bottom-up economic model. Mucheru termed it as a cake and one anchored on falsehoods.
We've had some people promising you analog solutions as part of a new economic blueprint to bring you prosperity. I am a student of economics, and I do not see how the successful economic uplifting of our people can be carried on with outdated solutions. We can and must do better than this. I must add that some of these far-fetched economic fantasies are anchored on falsehoods, sprinkled liberally with proclamations of sanctity by leaders who should know better.
Political rallies have been banned due to COVID-19 regulations, but the CS is unhappy over the manner in which religious leaders are allowing politicians to defile the pulpit.
The main problem, as I see it, is that these churches have been silenced by, say, massive donations from politicians who have been gifted with the pulpit to preach the gospel, sometimes of division, and to nudge citizens towards a class war.
Alan Ochanda, KTN News.
More details on what the CS had to say on page 4 of the Standard right here, where he was speaking at the launch of the National Council of Churches of Kenya Youth Fragility Report and Youth Policy Survey in Limuru. Had some sentiments to share in terms of judicial activism. And Manyasi, I'd like to begin with you on this. Is it judicial activism from where you sit? Did the courts settle political scores at the expense of the common man in terms of this BBI ruling?
First of all, there's a division between, there's independence of the judiciary in Kenya, but independence, of course, does not automatically mean that it cannot make rulings that then will be questionable. I say that because if you look at the entire ruling, both the composition of the bench right from the High Court to the Court of Appeal and the pronouncements therein, then it's possible for someone to start imagining whether it was 100% a judicial process. But at the same time, I think because we have created institutions that then are supposed to make independent decisions and carry their own responsibilities, then it's important to imagine that the judiciary is then doing its work and carrying on its responsibility. What I have always wondered, and loudly so, is what if today the judiciary was to run rogue? Then what do Kenyans do and where do they run? That is something that we should always keep at the back of our minds. For example, if the judiciary was to become activistic and make pronouncements that are activism related, then how do we fix that problem? As a constitution that we created, we needed to then figure out if one arm of government is, for example, if the legislature was to make legislation that will be illegal or unconstitutional, they are quashed by the courts. If the executive then makes pronouncements, for example, makes appointments or makes decisions that are illegal, they are quashed by the courts. But if the courts were to make pronouncements and announcements, then that will be against the will of Kenyans and become rogue, for example. These are just speculative questions that I'm posing out there. Then who will then deal with that challenge? This is a question that is bigger than all of us, and I will imagine that it's something that we need to start thinking about.
Proper speculation right there. But Gakuya, as you add your voice to that judicial activism point, let's talk about the economic fantasies. That's exactly how the CS mentioned them. Allow me to quote him. I'm a student of economics, and I do not see how the successful economic uplifting of our people can be carried out with outdated solutions. We can and must do better than this. It seems he was taking a jab at DP's bottom-up economic model. What's your take on this?
Yes, coming on that, first and foremost, let me say that Mucheru as a CS is part of the government, and he has a full ministry, a ministry that is trusted to take care of what we call youth, because we are in an era of migration from the analog to digital. And we could, if Mucheru is serious enough with his sentiments, we could have seen his effort making sure that actually he has nurtured about 3/4 of youth using the period he is now undertaking. Because the whole world is turning to what we call ICT, or new technology. And that new technology, you find that actually that is the way to go, and that is where the world is moving. But in Kenya, we have a minister by the name Mucheru, who is doing very little to make sure that actually these digital platforms are well reaching to the common youth down there. Our youth are still languishing in poverty. Youth that are well learned, but actually they have nowhere to be anchored. And what Mucheru could have done is to make a wide scope and make sure that actually his ministry puts a mega solutions of youth using his own mechanism within his ministry. Number two, Mucheru has alluded himself in the issue to do with the bottom-up criminalizing or trying to demonize the bottom-up system of economy. I believe that anybody who wants to demonize or criticize the bottom-up process must give Kenyans an alternative. And it should not be tomorrow, it has to be now. Because this government is not new, it is in power, it's now exiting. And during the 10 years tenure, it was quite enough for them to make sure that they have generated a way of making sure that the Kenyans are well fighting with what we call poverty. But going down there, there is a big society forgotten. Let us agree that we are not equal, all of us. And there is such a society that cannot be trained to become ICT or to become an IT. Those society are there. And those are the people you are saying, they are the forgotten society. Those people are the people who, most of them, they never even see the light of the classroom. Others are the people who are fallouts, and others are people who are in their own way are in that Juakari sector. Right. In that particular area, Rogers, allow me to explain a bit that society down there must require a solution for them to feel that they are part and parcel of our national cake. How will they come to feel? And actually, if there is no laid down structures that can be able to pull them up, that is where we are saying somebody must come in and must fix. And our people who are forgotten down there must also become part of the beneficiaries of our national cake.
So since you're speaking about formulated structures, in his defense, Mucheru said his ministry has formulated policies that advances the youth aspirations. Case in point, the Ajira digital platform that allows youth to earn from digital and digitally enabled jobs. So he's sort of speaking that it's not rhetoric, they need policies in place to sort of push this youth agenda. Well, what's your take on that?
I can tell you for sure. Whether he has brought in such an Ajira kind of technology, I can tell you, how will Mama Mboga benefit out of that? How will Mkokoteni Pura benefit on that? How will Beba of Marikiti benefit on that? These are the areas we are saying there is a forgotten society, it's not anchored anywhere in the law. And we cannot close our eyes and fail to think about how do we pull them up from where they are and make them also to feel that they are part of a Kenyan society. Okay. I think that's where the disconnect is. And finally, let me say, Mucheru demonizing the churches. The churches in pulpits, they are allowing politicians to politicize. I believe the church has freedom, and that freedom cannot be curtailed by anybody. I believe it is the prerogative of the churches to give room to whom is their guest. Okay. Because nobody will die and be to give my people lecture when I am in my church. Who will do that? Because surely most of the politicians get a chance also to explain what the government does when we are in those platforms. Do you want to tell me when I'm given an opportunity by a church just to get there and say zero? I cannot, because the public also want to get to hear from me what are the expectations, and that is how the politicians comes in. And if Mucheru feels that actually the churches are doing the wrong thing, then I think he must come up with with a new policy to ban such kind of behaviors.
Okay, so Prof, add your voice to this, because others might argue, you know, the bottom-up might be a fallacy, since there's Uwezo Fund, there's, you know, Women's Fund to help this Mama Mboga, you know, get access to funds that will promote their business. But also as you do that, this issue of the church podiums, the altars being used to pass political messages, which side of the fence do you sit on this?
Yes, first of all...
not forgetting bureaucracies.
Okay. Yes. Allow me first of all to come in on the issue of activism of the judiciary. Right. I think Kenyans, rank and file, ought to get used to the internationally accepted philosophy that government is a troika. And as a troika, we are talking about the executive, the judiciary, and the parliament. Their independence is enshrined in something called a constitution. This is globally. So it's not just peculiar for Kenya. So when one arm starts to sound as if they want to rule over another arm, then if activism is the word, let it be nonviolent activism. And as a student of peace studies, I advocate for nonviolent activism. So I don't think the judiciary is really being activist in that sense of the word. I think we ought to dismiss that and demystify that from the word go. Okay. Secondly, I want to come back to the issue of the church. You know, the church, don't look at it as an independent entity. Look at it also in the context of a civil society. We all know that we would not have had the constitution, as we call it, the 2010 constitution, if the civil society was not active in this matter. Let us be honest. They led the initiative. Some of them were bruised in the streets. Those of us who were there at that time, we know very well what they did. I think my only quarrel with the church, and being a church person myself, is the fact that some platforms have been turned openly, overtly, into allowing some, I don't want to call them rogue politicians, because if they're politicians, they cannot be rogue. But you understand what I mean. Yeah. Using the platform for self-aggrandizement. To that extent, and my church, the Quakers, we have been very clear about it. Come and worship with us, yes. But using that as a platform for political, especially divisiveness, we've been very averse to that. So if anyone has an issue with a church, let it be dealt with at an individual level. And having been a member of the National Council of Christian Kenya, National Christian Council of Kenya, I know that churches which are members, if one has any issue, you can present and it will be debated. So the civil society, in terms of the church, let us not demean their role in society. And finally, let me come to this issue of economic models. Quite honestly, I cannot rubbish everything that Mucheru has said. He has a point. I have always felt that Kenya's predicament right now does not need the Harvard academic or London School of Economic academic theories or models for that matter. What we require in Kenya now is looking at what predicament we have and then coming up with homegrown solutions to address those particular solutions. I am not a proponent of the bottom up, or whether it is bottom down, nor trickle down effect, because I feel that if you are going to address the problem of Kenya, then it must be holistic. You cannot address one sector without addressing the other. If you have time, I could just use the example of agriculture as a sector. All right. You cannot talk about creation of jobs in agriculture if first and foremost you have not addressed the issue of inputs in agriculture. You have not addressed the issue of transportation. And along that chain, you are creating jobs. You cannot stop to address the issue of storage of the seas. And finally, you cannot stop to address the issue of market. All right. So from that point of view, we really have to look at these things from a very holistic point of view, rather than just a bottom-up or a trickle-down effect. Those who are academic theories, which Malthusian theorists can do that in schools of economics. But as far as the problem is concerned, we have to be holistic. We have to look at what's the problem with the middle class so that they can also provide a market for the person down there to go into. Then we have to look at what we may call the upper class in terms of manufacturing sector so that we move away from growing raw products and exporting them to processing so that they can now have value addition for export. So as ANC, we have always said that we need a holistic economic approach. And recently, of course, the Honorable Mucheru already launched the economic agenda, which addressed most of these issues. And we are definitely providing an alternative that is workable, but it's not academic. It's not trickle-down, it's not bottom-up, but it is holistic.
Okay, and there's nothing wrong with these politicians pushing their...
And if you can allow me, I can just add a small write on that.
Yeah.
This is the bureaucracies we have. You have mentioned about various number of financial support for youth and women and so on. Mm-hmm. But don't forget that, in fact, if it is youth fund, unless you are in a group, you cannot access it. And if you must access it, you must have collaterals. These collaterals, where do you expect our youth to get these collaterals from? So that's a bureaucracy that also gets what we call handles to access to that kitty. It's only one kitty which works very well without many barriers, and this is Uwezo Fund. But Uwezo Fund, the biggest enemy on it is that the government does not top up that particular fund. It's now doomed. If it's only circulate whatever little was given in the first day of the previous parliament. Otherwise, if that kitty could be having some top-ups, I think it is riding very well and it's working well.
Okay. We'll get to talk about the state of the economy, even with the promises being handed on political podiums. How exactly